Hey guys, I hope you are all doing well. You'll probably be able to tell that this is my first time recording one of these videos, so I'm going to do the best I can and hope that it turns out okay. The purpose of this first video is to cover the period 1 and 2 review session that we would have been having this morning and tomorrow afternoon. There will be more videos to follow for next week's review session as well. And then if we continue to be out of school, I will do as many as I can. So this is not a required part of your assignments, but something optional if you did want to make sure that you get that review in. So I'm going to share my screen with you real quick, I think, so that you can see some of the things that I'm talking about here. I am going to post a link to this handout as well. This is just a basic outline of periods 1 and 2 with a few key highlights that'll be helpful to you. It is certainly not like an exhaustive, comprehensive outline of everything that you need to know. But I can post a link to one of those too. This is just kind of a guide to go along with my review. Also, as you start reviewing, you of course will want to have your notebook and your notes that you have taken to look through as well. So periods 1 and 2, period 1 begins with 1491, which is pre-Columbian America. So we introduced that topic from before the Europeans show up, and we look at how the Native Americans were living previous to European contact. And then period 1 ends in 1607, which is, as we know, the founding of Jamestown, which was the first enduring English settlement in the New World. The first one that didn't fail, give up, get lost, etc. And of course, there were others before, and there were other Europeans wandering around the Americas before that too, but this kind of begins our history of the United States. Then period 2 goes from that point until 1754 and the French and Indian War, which again, so kindly they rhyme for us. The French and Indian War, 1754. And we all know that that conflict kind of builds the tension that leads to the American Revolution, which is why we care. So I'm going to try to kind of flip back and forth between this and your notebook and just kind of give you an outline of the things that you'll want to be looking back through. So one of the first things that we did, if not the first thing, was a page that looks like this, and it has different early Americans, and it tells you a little bit about how they lived. And something that you want to keep in mind as you study is taking this information and putting it into the context of your AP themes. So hopefully you also have those attached somewhere in your notebook. And one big thing that we can tie in with our early Americans is geography and the environment. That one is usually kind of a tough theme to incorporate into topics, but this one's really easy because our early Americans had a lot of geographic and environmental obstacles to overcome, and they had a great way of adapting their lifestyles to work around those. So I'm not going to go through each group because I know that you guys can pull your notebooks as well, but for example, if you look at the Pueblo people, it tells you that they built those adobe houses and those irrigation systems because obviously it's not necessarily easy to deal with the weather and the setting in the Southwest. So those adobe houses kept them cool when they needed to be cool and warm when they needed to be warm because of the way that they're designed. And the irrigation systems helped to get them water, of course. If you turn the page, you come to the Columbian Exchange, which is kind of the next step. After we talk about our early American peoples and how they lived, we get to the arrival of Christopher Columbus and then all the other Europeans who follow, and how that begins to impact our native peoples, and also what impact that has back on the old world in Europe. So we talked about some positives and some negatives of the Columbian Exchange. Positive being things like new crops that are exchanged. The old world Europe particularly benefits from that because we get hardy crops like corn and potatoes that can feed people easily and quickly and keep them full. And that's going to increase the population in Europe, which is going to be important for their future endeavors like, the Industrial Revolution. So that is a positive. Of course, we eventually get the birth of the United States out of that. So, I think we would consider that a positive. On the other hand, we also have some negatives. You guys know that the people in the New World, those, native to the Americas, are going to be pretty negatively impacted by disease, and by kind of the ill treatment from the Europeans, whether that was, exploitation of the native people, or slavery, or um, any other examples of that you can think of. So it isn't all positive, and mostly the positives are affecting the old world, Europe, not the Native Americans. The next page in your notebook, or the next bit of information that we covered, were just some of the reasons why people were coming to the New World, and then some of the effects of Spanish colonization. We know that there was a lot going on in Europe at the time, including things like increased technology. And so we get new types of ships, new types of sailing equipment, new types of navigational tools that help to make going on this kind of mission possible. We also have a lot going on religiously. We have kind of this movement from the Catholic Church to restore their image after the Reformation, and some of the other criticisms that they faced. So they're going to be sending out people to try to spread Christianity, specifically Catholicism. And we're also going to see some economic changes. We are seeing an increase in trade and like the growth of capitalism. And in order to do that, you need people to trade with. You need natural resources to contribute to your capital. So people are going to be looking for opportunities for that. And this kind of untouched new world will be a perfect place to discover those things. We talk about the establishment of the Spanish colonies early on, and for the most part, it is not pretty for the native peoples. We know that the Spanish established the encomienda system, which I always compare to being kind of like feudalism in a way, in that these, Spanish, like slightly noble people are given land that there's a lot going on with cats right now. They're going to be given land to try to make productive, and they're going to use the Native Americans to work that land and exploit their labor, and they're, putting them into slavery until they start dying so quickly that they turn to importing slaves from Africa instead. They're also supposed to Christianize those people who are working under them, but as we all know, money comes first. So the main focus is making that land productive. We also talked a lot about that Costa system, which is probably something that I can maybe show you again real quick. Yeah, so Google is a wonderful thing. If you want to see the image here, oops, you can see the images of that CASA system. Here's someone's kind of description of it. We know that the Peninsulares, people who came directly from Spain, are up at the top, and then our native Indians and our African slaves are at the bottom. And then there's kind of this CASA painting that shows the like portrayal of what those people would look like, which is kind of wild by today's standards, but that's how they did things back then. So that is some information that you may want to look back at just for a visual reference. Next up was our comparison of how our different Europeans interacted with our native peoples. This is something that I think we've talked about a lot, so I'm not necessarily going to go through a lot of detail again. You can always flip back through your notes in order to get that detail. But the relationship between the Spanish and the natives and the English and the Native Americans was all pretty ugly. The Spanish exploiting them for labor in the encomienda system, and the English just simply wanting them to get the heck out of the way and take over their land, which resulted in a lot of conflict and violence. The French and the Dutch had more positive relationships, especially the French, because they didn't really try to alter the lives of the natives that much. In fact, they assimilated more to the lives of the Native Americans instead of asking the Native Americans to assimilate to their culture and the way that they behaved. And that was because their main purpose was to engage in the fur trade. And that was something that the Native American people had been doing for a long time and were very successful at it. So they thought that it would be easier to cooperate with them. Next, we've looked at the actual establishment of our colonies, and we talked about the colonial regions. As you guys know, the three colonial regions, the New England, the Middle, and the Southern colonies, developed very differently. And this is another good time to think about that theme of geography and the environment, because one of the major things that caused them to develop differently was the environment that they were adapting to. So in New England, their economy is going to be based off of trade and shipbuilding and logging. They can't farm up there. It's too cold. It's too rocky. They can grow some stuff, but it's not going to be enough to sustain themselves and make a living. So they are going to start these smaller communities that develop into big industrial cities based on trade and commerce. In the South, on the other hand, they have the perfect weather and the perfect environment for agriculture. So cash crops are going to become the thing to do. And Southerners will eventually decide that in order to make that work, they need a forced labor system, which of course leads to the rise and continual growth of slavery. So in that way, this not only impacts our economics, but our social system, because most of Southern society was built around either being a slave or being free. And if you were free, whether or not you owned slaves and how much land and how many slaves you owned. So there's a lot tied into just whether it was hot or cold or rocky or fertile where you were. As we continue through, we then get some information about the conflict between the early colonists and the Native Americans and the early colonists and themselves. And two key things that we had here from the review handout were King Philip's War and Bacon's Rebellion. So I'll talk to you about those just real shortly. King Philip's War was kind of the last attempt of the Native Americans to get the New Englanders to stop taking over their land and pushing them out of the way. It's also called Metacom's War. So if you see that, it's the same thing. But this was devastating, not only for the Native Americans, but also for the New Englanders. It took a long time for both of them to reestablish themselves, regrow their population. So it wasn't a victory for anybody, but at this point, the Native Americans are pretty defeated by the colonial progress. And we won't really see another huge uprising like that again until much later on. So this is going to be a turning point kind of in that relationship between the Native Americans and the Europeans in the New World. Bacon's Rebellion is the one that I think we all remember pretty well because we did that little debate in class about it. You might remember that Nathaniel Bacon was, and his supporters, hi there, another furry friend, were upset because the Native Americans kept attacking the kind of edges of the colonized region, the frontier. And the colonists felt that the royal governor, Governor Berkeley, should be doing more to help them. And Governor Berkeley said, well, I can, but it's going to cost you. His idea was to build kind of a wall around the outer frontier to make a barrier to prevent the Native Americans from getting to the colonists. But of course, they would have to pay for that. It would result in an increase in taxes. And you guys know how the story goes when people try to increase taxes. So that didn't work out too well. And Nathaniel Bacon and his men end up leading this rebellion. And one ultimate outcome of this is one that you might not really expect or associate with it, but we see a hardening of the racial lines and racial restrictions in the United States because a lot of these like lower class white men had partnered with indentured servants and with African slaves in this rebellion. And so the kind of elite white class said, we cannot have these people associating with each other. So they made solid, drew solid lines between, if you're white and you're poor, you're down here. But then if you're a slave or an indentured servant, you're even farther down on that list. So that has kind of an unintended consequence and doesn't really provide many gains for Bacon and his men either. The very last thing that we had within period 2 were these examples of transatlantic exchange, so kind of ideas and people and stuff that are coming from Europe across to the New World. So things like the Great Awakening. We have all of these new like philosophical ideas that we will see reflected in religious changes. People get worried that as colonists are establishing this new place, they're losing sight of God and they're losing sight of part of their religious purpose. And so we see this rebirth of religious fervor. And we talked about religious leaders like George Whitefield and Jonathan Edwards, the sinners in the hands of an angry God, dangling you like a little spider over the flame. So they used emotion and these kind of vivid images, these hellfire and brimstone speeches to kind of push people back into their religious spirit. We also had the Enlightenment, which will send over philosophy that will affect the founding of our government once we get one, and kind of the way that we're ruling ourselves here in the United States, what becomes the United States. Even from the beginning, things like the Mayflower Compact and the Virginia House of Burgesses show this blooming spirit of democracy in the colonies. So we see that influence from all of our Enlightenment philosophers. And lastly, we have the transatlantic trade, which of course is represented visually by this triangle trade, and the exchange that's going on between not only Europe and the New World, but also from Africa too. A couple of other things that I wanted to show you that might be helpful to you. Over here, I listed some key documents and things that could be helpful for you to look at. You guys know that everything's stimulus based, everything's based on documents. So the more that you practice looking at those, the better off you'll be. And I don't necessarily want to try to assign you a bunch more stuff like that to look at while you're also trying to keep up with all this online stuff. But I have some stuff that you can look at if you want. So if you go to the American Yawp, which is the textbook that we started with early on, any unit that you click on, you can scroll to the bottom of that page beneath under all of the reading and textbooky stuff, and there will be primary sources. So for example, here you can look at the Journal of Christopher Columbus, and just exposing yourself to those, reading through it, and stopping occasionally to figure out what the heck they're talking about will help to keep your brain sharp when it comes to analyzing and interpreting things. Also, there's this fabulous resource through Gilder Lehrman. They have a website that is all about lots of types of history, but they also have this one specifically dedicated to AP US history. You can see the web address here. It's just ap.gilderlehrman.org, but you can just Google Gilder Lehrman APUSH and it'll come up. And there are tons of things here. So it's by period, as you can see, and you can click on periods 1 and period 2, and they each have a video that's usually like 15 minutes or less, maybe 10 minutes or less. It comes with a timeline, it comes with documents, it comes with videos, and it comes with essays. So you can see not only those primary sources, but you can also see essays like this that are written by like history professors and historians and stuff like that. So good secondary sources too. The videos are not super exciting, but they're informative, and the timeline's pretty cool. Like you can click through and go to specific events and specific documents and all sorts of things. So, and each one of them usually has some little like video or something to go along with it. So it's pretty interactive, and I think it's pretty useful for review especially. So I think that pretty much concludes our periods 1 and 2 review. I don't know that I mentioned everything on that handout. So if you have any questions about anything, please feel free to email me. If you don't want to like type out a bunch of stuff, you can take a video of yourself asking me some questions and send it to me, and I'll send you a response back either in typed form or in video form. I want to be as available to you guys as I possibly can while you're not in school. And I'll still be working like a full school day. I'm just doing it from home. So please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And I'm going to drop a couple of other resources to go along with this in PDF or document form underneath this on Canvas. So hopefully between all those things, you'll get what you need. But I'll see you again soon. Bye.